Episode 23 of the New England Sports Media Podcast features John Karalis, the Celtics beat writer for MassLive.com, also a former television producer and reporter. And you can see the jerseys behind him, former Emerson men's basketball player and the first Emerson Lion to play professional basketball. John, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great. Anytime I get an intro like that, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, and the first thing we got to say is we know Jeff Gray, who is playing obviously professionally in Israel now.
Yeah, went to my high school.
So I guess he's following in the Karalis footsteps.
there were a few people. If it wasn't me, it was going to be probably one of five other guys quickly getting into the professional ranks. The great thing is hearing that this is how it's going with Emerson. That guys like Sam Presti can do what they're doing in the NBA. Because when I got to Emerson, it was a joke. The basketball program was a joke. And I take a lot of pride in building things. And so having been one of the original guys at Emerson to create a program where really good players are coming in and getting better and then going out and playing professionally, that's just, I couldn't be prouder. I couldn't be prouder because there's so many people that made something like that possible. So the fact that these guys are going out there and doing it, it's so amazing. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And obviously Emerson has a long lineage of great journalism and all that stuff as well, and TV especially. So you obviously now covering the Celtics for Mass Live. You were covering the Celtics, with something you said you like to build things from yourself, and that's exactly what you did while with Red's Army while being a TV producer. But so I'm curious, coming out of college, what did you want to be? And obviously the path you took was in TV. Is that what you wanted to do? Did you always want to be an NBA beat writer? How'd you get to where you are?
Yeah. So when I went to college, I wanted to be the next like Sports Center anchor. That was my goal. And that was Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann days. I mean, those were the OGs. That they made sportscasting fun. But I remember when I was in high school, people were like, "Oh, what do you want to do with your life?" I said, "Well, I like to talk. That's something I really like to do. I'm good at writing, communicating, stuff like that, and I love sports. So, sports anchor, sports reporter, something in that realm was always going to be my path somehow." And so I went to Emerson. I majored in broadcast journalism, but circumstances, personally, my parents had gotten a divorce while I was in high school. I have a brother who at that point, like he's 12 years younger than me. So at that point, he was still like a really young kid. I never really wanted to do what was necessary to climb the ranks of TV. Basically, like I didn't want to go to Des Moines, Iowa to be at a crappy little TV station, make my mistakes, and try to bounce around the country to take that next, better and better and better jobs. So I wanted to stay home. I wanted to be around my family. I wanted to be around to make sure like everything was okay with my mom and it was okay with my brother. And I'm a very like protective type of person. Like I want to be the protector. So like, it's like the dog that comes out to the front yards, like when you hear a noise, like that's kind of me. So I took a job behind the scenes in New Hampshire and at WMUR. And I just got into news producing just as a way to just start my career. And I said, I could always jump out if I want to, but what ended up happening was I just kept taking job after job after job and staying in news producing for a long time.
So how did that kind of balance out with you going to play overseas? Did you play right after you graduated college?
Yeah, so that was an interesting thing because I never thought like when my college career was over, I thought it was over. Um, we lost we played at that point. It was called the Great Northeast Athletic Conference. It was a new conference that this was the first year of that conference existence, and we lost in the championship game just remember crying in the locker room afterwards, like, oh my God, like this is it. This is over. The finality of it just hit me. Now, afterwards I was like, well, that's it. My basketball career is over. I was prepared to just go play in men's leagues. Um, and then my coach, Hank Smith, called me up and he says, hey, look, I know an agent out there. I talked to him about you. He thinks he has an opportunity for you. It's like, oh, okay. um, well, I got to get back into shape because basketball season had ended in like March and this was like July. And I'm like, I just been sitting around. Like I haven't been like, I've just kind of enjoyed like pseudo retirement at 22 or something, like 23. So he hooked me up with his agent and the agent says, yeah, there's this team out there and they'll take you. They've seen your stuff. They want you. I'm like, oh, okay, let's go. And it just happened like in a blink. Like all of a sudden I'm working out again. I'm preparing for another season. And I'm telling my family, like, hey, I'm going to Greece. And everybody's like celebrating because my family's from Greece. I'm first generation. So it was just a bit of a whirlwind. Like within the course of like a month and a half, next thing you know, I'm in Greece.
So I feel like nowadays, someone who went to school for journalism, especially broadcast, and then went over to play overseas, they would be thinking of doing like some type of journalism thing over there, like
Oh
vlogging, or like
yeah.
starting a podcast over there. Like when you were coming up, or when you were playing over there, was that on your mind at all, or was it just basketball?
You got to remember, this was 1996.
Right.
And I didn't have one of these to document my journey. Uh, it would have gone probably a lot differently if I had. But the sad thing is that this was a small team. It was a bad team, and there was at that point no cell phones, or like any cell phones that they had were like the little flip phones. So, and I wasn't going to get international. So it was just, I didn't have anything. I didn't have like the internet. I actually, when I was bored, I had to like read a magazine or something or watch TV. Um, I didn't have like, there was no social media back then. Uh, so if it happened now, yeah, I would have had a website. I would have had, a separate Twitter. I would have had a whole plan, a whole production thing, try to find a sponsor, all that crap. But it's actually not that bad because, it probably would have been a big distraction from what I was trying to do, which was trying to become a better basketball player. And, you know, in Greece, I had to play a lot more face up than I did in college. And so I was really trying to like work on that part of my game. So vlogging would have just been a distraction, like, set up a camera, like, oh, here's me trying to like work on a rip through, pull up jumper. Like, no, just go do your work, John.
Yeah. So how many years were you in Greece? Just one?
Just one. Yeah. I tore my quad, which I do not recommend.
Yeah.
I hurt my back trying to come back early from tearing my quad because at that point they they still owe me money. Like, and any player who's played out at this level of European basketball, they have the same story. Like, yeah, they still owe me money too.
Yeah.
They kind of stop paying you everything that they say they're going to pay you because the money isn't like the money isn't great. It's low level stuff. So, you're making a living. They're paying for you to eat and live. And so you don't worry for anything. And you're living in Greece, which is awesome. But at the same time, I'd like the money that you said you're going to pay me. When you're hurt, that kind of stops. And so that's the combination of two pretty bad injuries, and that knowing that I wasn't going to be like a 10-year, I wasn't going to play there till I was 35. I was like, you know what? That's after that season. I was like,
Right. So you come
I'm
back. So you come
yeah.
back to America. You take your first job in New Hampshire, and you got WBZ, and for almost what? See, almost 15 years when it comes down to it, at a couple
Mhm.
different roles. So, but at some point during that tenure, you start Red's Army.
Yes.
Um, how did the idea come up? Why did it come up? Like, and then
Yep.
just for context, you started this in '05, so that's before Twitter, kind of before social media really took off for journalism. So, where is your vision for this? Because this wasn't done at that time necessarily like it is now.
Right. Um, so I get the job at WBZ, um, and I'm working overnights. So I'm producing a 5 a.m. newscast. And it just so happens that the 6 a.m. producer was a former teammate of mine, which I didn't know at the time when I took the job, Chuck McKinney. And Chuck went to Emerson. He was a year ahead of me, and he played for 1 year or two, and then left to focus on his schoolwork. But I get there and Chuck's working. I'm like, oh, Chuck, what's going on, man? So we reconnect. And at that point, the blogs are starting to become a thing. Celtics blog had already existed. We were reading Boston Dirt Dogs, which was a Boston Red Sox blog. And Boston Dirt Dogs is the inspiration for Red's Army because they were having so much fun with it. They were photoshopping. They were, just really just letting loose and just being fans and just having a blast with it. And Chuck and I looked at each other, and one of us said, "We got to do this for the Celtics." And we're like, "Wait a second, we actually should do this for the Celtics." And so we were like, "Let's start a website." And we started our own site, and we came up with the name. We said, all right, well, if you're a Celtics fan, who are you? And we thought, well, if you're a Celtics fan, you're following Red Auerbach. Red Auerbach is our general, which means we're all part of Red's Army. And then redsarmy.com was born. That was the genesis of that site. And the early part of that site, just so people know, just so how old I am, if you can't tell by the gray in my beard, that was before like WordPress blogging software. Um, so we had to create a site that we would highlight everything, move it down, create a text box, write our new stuff. If we wanted to do a long form thing, we'd create a link to a separate web page that we'd publish, and then email the file to each other. So I said if I wanted to write something, I'd tell Chuck, "Hey, I'm gonna write something here." I'd create this site, whatever. Email him the new front page. So when he updated, he's like, "Oh, okay. If I'm gonna update it, then he has to." But it's like making fire with two rocks every day. It was wild.
So you start a blog in that era before Twitter. Now you start something, you can promote it on your social media. How did you guys get people to read it and get fans?
We went to message boards were big back then. So I would hop on message boards with the username Red's Army, and you have a signature that you could put on the bottom of your messages, and it's redsarmy.com, the voice of Celtics fans and whatever. So I would just go onto like the boston.com message boards and participate in every Celtics discussion that I could. Any popular message board I could find, I was just in there. So it basically was like Twitter before Twitter, and that's probably why Twitter became what it is. But yeah, I would hop on message boards and just keep talking about the Celtics and answering and asking questions, and more people just click on that site, and click on that link in my signature, and slowly built an audience.
So how did you get to like the point of transitioning from TV full time, like as your full time job, to writing and reporting, and switching over from that sort of career, not a career change, but like the path changing over?
Yeah. So that happened recently. So I started the site in 2005, 2006 season. And then I left TV, in 2018, 2017, end of 2017. So that's a 12-year run of doing both. And there were probably hundreds of times in all of it where I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is silly. I got to stop. But I could never stop doing it. I just always wanted to talk Celtics. I always wanted to write about it. It's just ingrained in me. So I worked at WBZ for a while. I ended up getting fired in 2010. 2010, I end up I get a divorce and I get fired from my job in TV in 2010. So 2010 was a hell of a year for me. But I looked at it as an opportunity. I thought, most people, or a lot of people, I think, would look at that and just kind of get down about things. But the divorce was mutual. I was kind of at the end of my road at WBZ. I won't go into crazy details there, but I was just done. So I was happy to lose that job. And I just sat there in my house in July. I was like, I can do anything. I can do anything I want right now. Unencumbered. I don't have to answer to anybody. My family's all grown up. My brother was married or getting married. And I was like, you don't need me anymore. So at that point, my friend Jeff Garcia, who does the Locked On Spurs podcast, he lived in New York, and he said, "Hey, come on over to New York. Come hang out with me." So I did, and I was like, "Hey, New York's pretty cool." I knew a few people from TV, from working at WBZ, who had moved on to New York. So I called a couple of people up, said, "Hey, do you have any freelance work or anything like that?" Yep. So I started freelancing at Fox 5 News in New York City. And so I ended up moving there full time. And, at the end of 2010, basically, I was still splitting time, but I was living in New York at that point. So I worked there for a little bit. Then I switched over and went over to NBC for a year. And, then I went back to Fox 5 News under new leadership. And so that allowed me to get on TV. I was able to talk to the news director there, Byron Harmon. I was producing stuff. I still doing behind the scenes work, but he was very open to hey, look, we've got a ton of people here that have levels of expertise that can do other things. I'm not going to pigeonhole you. So that allowed me to get on TV. So now I've got a resume that has behind the scenes TV work. People see me on camera, and now I'm building kind of this, multiple ability to do multiple things. I guess so. In the background, I didn't know this at the time, but Mass Live had noticed. But in 2017, I was kind of done with New York. I had my 7-year run. It was, great, but circumstances kind of, the expiration date hit. And I was just look, I was doing the Locked On Celtics podcast. I am doing the Locked On Celtics podcast still. And that's doing well enough at that point. I was freelancing at Boston.com, doing stuff there. And I thought, look, that stuff is enough. I have a plan. I can get by. I trust myself. I've got this body of work now where I'm on TV. I can make this work. So I decided to set up a Patreon. I quit my job in New York City. I moved back to Boston, and I just start covering the Celtics on my own through my Patreon, through redsarmy.com, through boston.com, and through the Locked On Celtics podcast. And I think I'm just going to piece this together. And I've got about 2 years before I go broke and I have to go do the TV again. Right about that time, I'm going to Jay King's apartment. And Jay King was the original co-host of what was the Rain and Jays and became the Locked On Celtics podcast. And he had left Mass Live to go to The Athletic. About the time where I quit my job, I sent Mass Live a resume and never heard back. So I'm going into Jay's apartment. And I remember as he's opening the door, he turns to me and says, "Hey, why haven't you applied for the Mass Live job?" I said, "I did apply for the Mass Live job. They haven't responded." He says, "Well, you better go talk to those guys because they want to hear from you." Oh, okay. Turns out they'd lost my resume. And shortly after I got to Boston to do this on my own, I ended up getting an interview with Mass Live and they ended up hiring me. So the timing actually worked out really, really well.
So you mentioned the podcast too. Obviously now like everyone has a podcast, but you seem to have started off in a time where the industry was just kind of growing a little bit. And you said at that point, when you transitioned from TV, it was doing well enough. Like in your opinion, like what is doing well with the podcast? And were you guys able to find sponsors? Like how does that kind of work?
Yeah. Being part of the Locked On Podcast Network allows them to do the work for us as far as sponsors and sell the sponsorships and basically split the money with us. So it's kind of like an ad sharing system. And we were, the podcast was doing well enough where I knew what I was making from there pretty consistently. I could pay my bills. Between that, what I was getting from Red's Army, what I was getting from Boston.com, I was like, I can pay my bills. I can make it through. It's not going to be great. I'm not going on any vacations, but I can get by. And that was enough for me. So, podcasting has evolved. Like I started podcasting before it was called a podcast. I forget how the hell we even did it. There was a thing called Blog Talk Radio where Chuck and I would do a thing called the 2-Man Game. And, every week we would do like a show, and it was a live show where people could call in. So I'm a broadcasting guy. So I love, a camera, a microphone. I'm good. Let's go. I'll talk. You ask me a question, I talk for 5 minutes. Like I can talk. It's not a problem. So, the podcasting has always been something I wanted to do. I never, like 5 days a week can be a little bit of a grind, but like it's still like I always want to do something. And the beauty of the podcast is you kind of have the control to do it on your own. And the beauty of the network is they find a way to get you paid for it.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, man. Like you're doing podcasts 5 days a week. It's the off season. What's your method for how do you prioritize topics and make sure you're not talking about like the same stuff every day, like, Gordon Hayward or the draft picks every single day?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes the off season, sometimes in the off season, like in a regular schedule, I'll drop it down to like 3 times a week, which is still like insane. Like in August to do a podcast on the Celtics 3 times a week. It's different in the off season. You have to kind of like break things down. Do like a Jason Tatum show. You do a Jaylen Brown show. You do, you can get through the players. You can get through the coaches. You can get through Danny Ainge stuff. That'll get you through a few weeks. In the meantime, guys are doing stuff on social media. You get guests in. You talk about the league in as a whole. Like sometimes the less news there is, the wider the net that you put out. It's just like any like animal that's looking for food. If there's plenty of food around where it lives, it's just going to eat around where it lives. But if the food gets scarce, they're going to start migrating and trying to find the food somewhere. And that's what I'm doing. Gordon Gordon Hayward recently, like every episode was Gordon Hayward, but it's a new aspect of Gordon Hayward. So you hit on the new stuff, or you hit on things that maybe you even forgot to talk about the day before, ran out of time to talk about the day before. And I will say that Twitter is really good for fueling a podcast topic. There are times when you might see me on Twitter, just it looks like I'm arguing with everybody, which I do like to do sometimes. I just like to argue with people.
Yeah, I saw you were debating like Sean Kemp and Vince Carter.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm doing my old man thing there. Like the guys of my generation, those guys were the best. But a lot of times when I'm going back and forth with people on Twitter, especially when it comes to like criticism of Danny Ainge, and I'm trying to see what they're saying. I'm trying to get their arguments. So when I go on my podcast, which I solo host, I have something to talk about. Like I have something to talk to. You know, I'm always envisioning like I'm talking to a person, and if I'm making a point, I can in the middle of that say, and now I've heard this counterpoint, blah 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 blah, and here's my reaction to that, and that kind of keeps the conversation going. So a lot of times putting stuff out there on social media helps kind of craft what my podcast topics are going to be.
No doubt. So, like, your day to day as a Celtics reporter, obviously, like Boston is it's not New York, but it's one of the biggest towns in terms of sports media coverage. Obviously, Jay King, like you said, still covers the Celtics. You know, the Globe has 2 Celtics writers. Mass Live has another, you and Tom Westerholm. Everyone's got Celtics writers. Everyone's got Celtics reporters. So, like, obviously, you've been covering it from kind of a different angle with Red's Army, like the blog style, but how do you go about like what do you think your path or your voice or your like what you offer is, and that's different? Like everyone finds their niche, and obviously you found yours. So can you kind of just explain what your niche is and why you're able to resonate with so many Celtics fans and people who want to know about the team?
I think my biggest skill is being able to explain things in a way that people can understand them. So having played the game and played, I think, at a higher level than anybody that's on this beat, and maybe that's on most beats. I do have a different perspective. It's not a better perspective. It's a different one. And so I definitely think of the game a lot like a player. And so I think that separates my voice a little bit. And then I can take that stuff and explain some of the things that I'm seeing. Like I can visualize things that are happening in the game from the floor level, you know? So when I see something happening, like whatever, a play, and when a guy recognizes something and I say, wow, I can't believe you recognized that, it's because I can see myself on the floor, and with that size of people around me, and say, to recognize that, this is what it takes to recognize this play, because you have to have practiced this, you have to understand it, you have to have like this recognition, and so on and so on and so on. So I think that separates me just enough where there are so many, like the Boston Celtics beat is just phenomenal. It's just full of talent. And you're not gonna stand out just by being a good writer. Everybody on this beat is a good writer. You're not just gonna stand out by being a good reporter, because everybody here knows how to do this job. This is like elite level stuff. So I can't compete just head to head trying to be out reporter like Adam Himmelsbach or, Mark Murphy, like those. No. So I have to do stuff like I have to be able to see things that they might not see, and then make that my focus. And then that stuff is what stands out. But I do think that I do have a particular skill that I can explain, whether it's a thing that happened on the floor salary cap stuff, anything that might be complicated. I think I do have that ability to tell people like, all right, think of it this way, and they can kind of grasp these things. And then the more people say, you know what, I didn't know this until John told me this. That's how I maintain my audience. It's how people, like one of the greatest compliments I can get was, people who say like recommend me to other people, say John's made me a little bit smarter about the game. Like that's exactly what I want to be, exactly who I want to be as in this role.
Yeah, that definitely separates you because you think of the blogger, podcaster. You don't necessarily think of someone who like played professionally. Do you still play?
I haven't in a while. A lot of it's pandemic related.
Right.
And then I'd like to. The thing is, I'm not great at remembering how old I am. So I still want to do certain things that I used to do. And my body's like, are you nuts? You jump? You're not jumping. No, son. Your jumping days are over. So there are a lot of times where like I go to do something and then I go to rise up and it's like, what? No. So I have to get out there and develop my old man game. The guy who jumps a half inch off the ground, and I've got to figure out like my crafty little moves. I got to study a lot of Paul Pierce film to get some of those crafty like elbow moves to kind of get myself around people. A lot of fadeaways. I really have to practice the fadeaways. I have to extend my range. So I go out there and play, but like I get very, very frustrated when it's like, oh yeah, you're in your 40s, John. You're not in your 20s anymore.
So I'm curious, like in a non-pandemic world, when you're in the locker room every day, like for the Celtics, following them, all the time, when you talk basketball with the players, the coaches, people around the game, like, do you think they instantly recognize that you know more than the average beat reporter about like the X's and O's of basketball?
I think so. I also think though that they all know who I am. Like when you're on the beat, like they get a little primer on everybody. So like I didn't say a word to Brad Stevens, and like one of the first news conferences, it was post game, and I got my balls busted so bad afterwards. But I asked Brad a question that I kind of knew the answer to, and he was answering the question. He goes, you played. And so, but like it's like a teacher giving a student a compliment. So afterwards, all the guys on the beat, they're, you played. So I get my balls busted sometimes when Brad references my playing days, because he's done that a couple of times. They all get like the bio of who's on the team, so they kind of know. They want to know who to play to, like they want to know who you are. They want to know kind of what you're about. So, but I also want to be clear that the NBA level terminology and the NBA level expertise is so far above. Like I need to be immersed in that. Like I need to be part of a team and be part of that team for a while to really know all of the things. The way I always like to put it is I'm like a high school science teacher. Okay. And, fans are like students, they some know a little bit more, but I'm like teaching high school science. NBA people are like Stephen Hawking. Like I can show you how to make a volcano reaction. He's doing like quantum physics. And like, okay, I could maybe pick up some of it somewhere along the way, but that's my level. That's what I always say. So these guys are doing so many things and processing it so much faster. It's like an old computer versus a brand new gaming console. Like things just process so much faster with them that, I can see a lot of the stuff that they see. I see it on my second or third watch of a game. Like I'll watch the game, write my stories, then I'll go back knowing all of the results. Then I can start watching things that, okay, how did this happen? How did that happen? And like rewinding a play 2 and 3 times, I was, oh, okay, yeah, okay, I get it. Brad Stevens is recognized that right away. The players on the floor recognize that right away. And so that's the different level. So however I can talk to them, like, that we talk about some of the nuance of the game and they know that I played, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm at their level, because if I try talking about things at their level, no, they'll rattle some stuff off like Goodwill Hunting. Like I'd be like, what? Okay, let me write some of these things down and go Google this stuff, because I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, John, that's all we have. We don't want to keep you too long, but we really appreciate your time and really enjoyed talking to you. And thanks again for joining us here on the New England Sports Media Podcast.
My pleasure.